Should we talk about what we were talking about this morning?
I mean, that's up to
Uh,
you. I've been out of the game for so long. I don't know how much insight I have to offer, but
yeah, I was laughing this morning with Ben, everybody, because I have been out of the dating game for quite a few years myself and found myself on what was the term? It was an accidental date.
yeah,
Um,
yeah, something like that.
and
Accident.
it, an accident. Yeah, I think that's the best way to describe it. But I was talking with Ben and Tara in the territory, as we now call it, which is our code for girl talk. But yeah, it was an interesting experience. I haven't done the date thing in a while, and it was actually really fun. I had a good time.
Yeah, I mean, I just remember it being super confusing trying to figure out, like, let's go hang out because I like you, but do you understand that I like you?
I was gonna
Or
say, didn't Tara friend zone you for like a long time before she finally gave in?
yeah, 18 months I was after this girl, but she knew.
She knew.
What happened was she went to London for a semester and missed me and was like, "Damn it!" And so when she came back, we started dating. But
I mean,
it's hard to figure these things out. And I think the ancient philosopher Hadaway said it best when he said, "What is love, baby? Don't hurt me. Don't hurt me no more."
well, hopefully this is not a hurt situation, but apparently I'm back in the dating game. So pat on the back for Grace. I've heard it's rough out here and I'm not looking forward to it. So here we go.
Proud of you.
I know.
Let's
Doing my
not.
best.
Yeah. Speaking of making wise acquisition decisions, what's our
Yes.
topic for today?
Well, after careful consideration, we are going to discuss something that Ben and I are both very familiar with after this fall, which is buying a new bike and what goes into it. Because Ben and I had, I think, the perfect experience together because we were both buying bikes, but we had very separate experiences while buying bikes. And so we thought it would be a good time to talk anybody through buying a new bike if they've never done that before, kind of what goes into it and what to expect from just about every angle. Because again, like we had such different experiences buying the same bike in October. And it's just something I think everybody should be a little more educated on and also just feel a little less anxious about. Because there are a lot of things that can be very intimidating about buying a motorcycle because again, you're also buying a motorcycle. It's a huge purchase no matter how much money you have. So
Yeah, and it's a question I get quite a bit. Actually, it pops up all the time on my channel because I have a lot of new riders, a lot of non-riders, a lot of people thinking about getting into riding, and they're intimidated to walk into the dealership the first time and not get screwed over, because that's always the fear, and it's a fear because it's a thing that happens. So I've been lucky enough to buy quite a few new bikes and used bikes, but mostly new recently, and so I at least feel like we can talk through the process in a semi-informed way, and hopefully, knowing is half the battle. People can go in armed with the knowledge of what it looks like, and hopefully have a much more pleasant experience.
yeah, absolutely. Because there were certain aspects of my experience that were great and certain aspects that were shit. And I like talking about the shit stuff. It's very, I think, nice to clear the air and also, again, let people know what to actually expect versus it all just being sunshine and rainbows. Because let's face it, it's not.
Yeah, and the advantage of this topic is nobody thinks it is, which is, I mean, if anything, I think people think it's worse than it is.
Yeah.
Uh, but they're always going to try to force things on you and charge you as much as they can, and so it's just sort of important to know what you're going to do going in and kind of make some decisions before you walk through the door.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, before we get started, by the way, it is actually sunny out today, and I was thinking about getting the Transel out. This is just a funny segue, but I was walking the dogs, and a lot of the time it's very warm in the sun here during the winter, but it's very cold during the shade. And I'm like all excited checking out the road conditions and
I already
everything.
know what you're going to say.
I was walking the dogs. I slid on ice and I
I
bit it
knew it.
so hard. And I was just like, nope, bike is not going out today because ow, 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 ow. And yeah. So anyway, I've had a great morning.
Yeah, imagine doing that at 40 miles an hour.
Exactly. And I don't have the crash kit on the bike yet because the bike build starts next week. So she's going to stay in the garage today. Very sad, but yeah. Anyway, let's talk about buying a bike. So let's start from the beginning. We were buying the Transel, and I walked in to do a trade-in, and Ben, you walked in with a different approach to your purchase.
Yeah, I called ahead of time and got them to give me the exact amount because I went to the bank and got a cashier's check and walked in with it, which is something I've only recently actually been able to do. I've definitely financed a lot of motorcycles in my day. But yeah, so it struck me how much difference there was between your experience and mine because you were financing. And I literally, like, I was in and out probably. If they hadn't washed my bike, I'd have been in and out of there in 30 minutes, except I was waiting for you to get your paperwork done so that I could get in and do my paperwork. But if that hadn't happened, definitely I would have been in and out in less than an hour. I was still out in half the time that you were.
Which I think is a great way to say, go in and buy the bike outright if you can. Now, again, not everybody can, but if you have the chance to, it's so much easier. And yeah, so I guess with mine, I was going to trade in Lorraine, my CB500X, and they gave me, like a lot of dealers are doing at the current time, a very low offer. So low, in fact, that I laughed in the guy's face when he shared it with me.
Well, how did you know it was low?
Because I had done the research ahead
There it
of
is.
time.
Mhm.
Yes. And that is something everybody needs to do ahead of time, is you need to do the research to understand the value of your bike. There are a lot of great tools online through the Googles. And it's just very easy to kind of look at the value based on the mileage, wear and tear, Kelly Blue Book, all those things all really help. So yes, I went to trade in, and the trade in did not go as planned. And so I actually sat down to talk through financing the bike, which right now, with how the economy is kind of a nightmare because interest rates are exorbitant at best. And on top of that, I planned to pay off the bike pretty quickly, even though I was financing it. One of the reasons I financed or wanted to finance the bike was because after living on the road for over a year, my credit score took a plummet because I was not using any credit cards. I was not paying rent. I was not in the system per se, and I got punished for it. Yeah. So unfortunately, that is a hazard sometimes of being a nomad. If you are just living off what you have, which you'd think the system would help you out in that regard, but really you just get penalized for it. So I've been trying to build my score back up, getting credit, etc. But the financing was so bad with this bike, I ended up buying it outright, just like Ben did, because it was a nightmare. I literally was looking at interest rates and they were so bad. It was not even worth the like couple of months of paying it off and dealing with all of that to begin with. It would have been a couple $100 at the very least extra. And that's over a period of 3 months. I think some of the interest rates I was looking at were between 8 and 12%, which is way too high. Yeah.
I still have a credit card with 8% because I've had it for like 15 years.
Yeah.
Forget about that now. So that's important. A couple things there I think that are important. One, your credit score will affect the interest rate that you get. So it's important to have some idea what that is, and or maybe ask somebody you trust to co-sign if they have a better credit score, things like that. Because the 4% in a 4% higher interest rate, you're going to pay significantly more over the life of the loan. And interest rates are super high right now. We just financed the car, and my wife has excellent credit, and we barely got out under 8%. And a few years ago, we were buying cars at 3.5%.
Yeah. It was so nice when it was in the 3%-ish area. I think I did a personal loan for a bike. And I think I paid like 2.9 on that personal loan for it, which is so outrageous now when you think about it. But yeah, I mean, I don't have a bad credit score by any means. So it's just knowing that ahead of time is always good because like Ben said, like that's going to determine some of your financing, but also understanding that the economy is in the state it's in right now and interest rates for everything are just through the roof. So, I mean, it's not just purchasing a vehicle, it's also the housing market and mortgages and everything else. So yeah, I think that's something definitely to be aware of. But yeah, so I went in with the plan and the plan got completely sidetracked both times. So
So another good pro tip, because you don't, the last thing you want is to be blindsided by all that in the dealership and have to make those decisions while you're sitting in front of the finance manager who's telling you that everything's going to be great. So one thing you can do, this is, and I've always been an impulse buyer, so I've been bad at this my whole
me
life, because
too.
I go in, I see something, I'm like, ooh, I want that. Oh, you can get it for me right now, and they know that, they prey on that.
Yeah,
So if you figure out that you're in the market for a motorcycle and you have a rough idea how much it's going to cost, even if you don't know which model you're buying, you
yeah,
can get pre-approved, pre-approved for a loan through your bank, or a credit union is where I always like to go. They often have their interest rates posted on their website even, so you can get a rough idea of what you're going to look at. But you can get that done in a couple hours depending on how busy they are. You can do it online. So if you knew that you were pre-approved for $10,000 at 7% or whatever, walking into the dealership, that's a big arrow in your quiver. Now, they will sometimes make better deals if you're financing through them because they can get more money on the back end, but I've
right.
never seen it change enough to be worth not knowing what I was doing ahead of time.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, again, it's just kind of knowing what this is like ahead of time, and also knowing who you are. I'm very much like Ben. I went in there and I was just like, I'm buying a bike today. I really didn't do a lot of thinking about it ahead of time. And there are a lot of people who think about this for months and months ahead of time, which I kind of wish I was one of those people, but that's just also just not the way the cookie crumbles most of the time either. I think if you're, especially Ben, like, because you're a bike reviewer, so you're constantly having to kind of see what's available within the market when we're in the Pacific Northwest, and also what the newer bikes are to be reviewing, correct?
Yeah, and side note, I have to say kudos to you for your level-headedness that day, because it would have been pretty easy to be like, screw it, just give me what you're going to give me in finance because I got to get this bike. I got to get it out of here.
Yeah,
And you stopped, you took a step back, even, and you rode down there. So not only did you have to decide otherwise, but you also had to figure out how to get your other bike home when you
yeah.
bought that one. So that just like a whole bunch of like really cool-headed, smart decisions that you made
Which
that I don't know that I would have been capable of.
I don't think I could have done it a few years ago. I think that just knowing ahead of time that I was probably going to get low balls with the trade-in was a good mindset to have. I didn't think I was going to get that low balled. But it also was then very easy for me to just go, fuck that, like, and just kind of turn around and be like, I'll figure something else out. And I kind of knew I was going to get the bike no matter what. I was going to make it work. It was also just, again, like just staying calm, making a wise financial decision. Even though it drained my savings account, it also was what needed to happen in that moment. And I was okay doing that. Granted, not everybody can just go, okay, I'm just going to drain my savings and buy this motorcycle. But that's also why I'm not married and don't have children.
So you
So,
you walked in with a walk-away price, a bottom line, right, that you were willing to
yeah,
accept.
yes, I
And
did.
that
Yeah.
was based on your research on the KBB and JD Power, I assume.
Yes.
Nice.
Yes. All the things. Um, yeah. Okay. I think really quick, let's talk about the trade-in aspect of things, because I have traded in before and I felt I had definitely gotten the value of the bike that I was trading in. However, I feel like that's shifted a little bit with the motorcycle industry recently. I don't know if you've done trade-ins recently or not, Ben, but I feel like the last two times I've traded in bikes, I've gotten completely lowballed hardcore. But previously, when I had traded bikes in, it'd been pretty decent. So I don't know if this is a new trend or something you experienced, or if that's just what I'm getting here in Bend, Oregon.
Well, I haven't traded in. I've actually never actually traded in a bike, but I have tried and run
Yeah,
into similar situations to what you're talking about. And it's crazy because I don't ever want, like, I'm not trying to screw the dealership. I understand that they have to sell whatever they buy from me for a profit.
yeah,
I always go in just like my bottom line is low blue book. And if you can't hit that, then you're literally screwing me. You're disrespecting me.
yeah,
But if you buy it from me for that, I know you're going to sell it for high. So, good example. This isn't a motorcycle, but I went in. I traded my Tundra in and bought a Tacoma. a couple weeks ago, a month ago, and first place I went offered me 4 grand under low book, and I was like, okay, bye. Like, no.
Yeah.
And
No.
the second place was like, we'll give you, they gave me just over, and they came down the MSRP. I was like, sold, done, let's go. Like, I understand that I'm gonna have to pay close to MSRP, and I understand that you're gonna give me as little as you can for my trade. By the way, they marked it up 7 grand when they relisted it, which I knew they were
Yeah.
gonna do.
Yep.
So it just depends on the dealer. If you don't have a super high demand bike, really the only reason to trade in my opinion, is, well, there's a few. You're super impatient and you just want it to be done. You don't think the hassle of selling it yourself is worth a couple grand or whatever. It depends on the bike. Because I sold my Versus and I sold it at quite a loss, and I had a hell of a time getting it sold, but I
Yeah.
still sold it for more than any dealership I called was offering me.
Yeah.
And I've had good luck with my private party sales. It gets easier. It gets easier the bigger my channel gets, because I can just post like my Norden. I sold it in 3 hours and I had 3 full price offers.
Yeah.
But I can reach a lot of people who are interested in motorcycles, so it's like cheating.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and that's where I got very lucky, because one of my buddies, Chad, Good Life ADV, he actually found somebody very quickly to buy my bike for what it's worth. And it was a nice turnaround. That's one of the benefits of being connected to the communities. You can kind of let a couple people know and they can ask around.
Yep.
And it's a lot easier, I think, for guys, especially because I don't know that many women that do ADV riding that would want a CB500, because it's like the perfect intro bike, essentially, I think. And, obviously now that I have the Transel Out, I don't need essentially two of the same bike. But it's harder, I think, to find women that want to take that next step to like a 500 versus like a 150 or 250 to ride dirt and things like that. So using your community for sale is a great thing to do, especially too, because again, like I got almost 3 times what the dealership offered me for my bike from the guy that bought it from me. So it's just kind of a nice thing to know ahead of time. It's just that's going to benefit you way more than trying to do a trade-in. I learned that firsthand, obviously.
I didn't know you sold it. That's good. Good to hear.
Yeah, I just did a couple weeks ago. So yeah.
And people always hear that, use your community, and they're like, but I don't know anybody that rides. And I just always have to jump in and point out that there are countless, there's Facebook groups mostly, because again, adventure riding is a thing that more older people tend to do because they can afford to. And so it's not as many discords and stuff, but like I'm in a Mid-Valley Adventure Riders Discord. I'm in a Central Oregon Adventure Riders.
Yeah.
It's not Discord, sorry, Facebook group. I'm in a Central Oregon Adventure Riders. There's a Central Oregon Dual Sport Riders. All of these are local people. And there's a Pacific Northwest Dual Sport group, and people always post up their stuff for sale. Some of these groups even have a separate for sale group, and that's a really good way to hit a targeted audience of people that are going to trust you because you're members of the same group. They can ask questions. And the same on the other side of the coin, if you're shopping, like getting it from another group member who you can at least trust a little bit more than random Joe off the street, you can maybe see some of their adventures or talk to them, is a really good way to find particularly used motorcycles. I also recommend, if there's a model specific Facebook group, and there always is. So I'm in a 450L group, a 300L group, a Tenere group, and a Transel Out group, and they're always posting stuff for sale. For a while, that Tenere group was the best place to find one for sale when you couldn't find it anywhere else.
Yeah, I mean, they were gone for a while. So the only place you were going to find them was in those groups or through friends or people you knew that ride. I mean, it's just, that's kind of how a lot of these bikes get too, is once they're gone, they're gone. And nobody really knows dealership wise when they're going to be getting any more in. It just kind of happens on a whim. And it's hugely disappointing. But if you do buy a bike and you don't ride it much and you want to resell it, it also means it's a great opportunity for you to make back what you spent and actually get the bike into a good home ahead of time. But yeah, absolutely. I guess let's talk about buying new versus used too, because up until 2 years ago, I never bought anything new. I always bought used bikes. I bought the CB500 new because at the time I was working with Ride Adventures and doing touring, and it just made sense for me to have the bike that I did for tours and also for riding around here and doing ADV riding in Oregon. I then bought the Transel Out new, which was because obviously it's an awesome
Way to
bike,
get one.
dream bike for Grace. And it is the first time we've had these bikes in North America in 30 years. So obviously gonna buy it new. But for the most part, all of my other bikes have been just lightly used. And I've had everything you can imagine, whether it was dirt bikes or Triumphs, or I had a GS for a while. I mean, it's kind of a hodgepodge, but I don't know. I think used is often the way to go unless you're in a special circumstance, kind of like we were with the Transel.
Well, and in the dual sport adventure space, if you're patient, you can get ridiculous deals on newish bikes, fully farkled. That is functional sparkles for those of you who don't know, and AKA mods. Low miles, because people like the idea of off-road riding more than they like the reality, and people don't get training, stuff like that, whatever. A perfect example, for a way lower price. So because mods don't add to the value of a used bike. They don't. People, and if you see people listing one for $3,000 over MSR because I know what I got, they're not going to sell it for that. They're lucky to get a little bit over MSRP. So perfect example, I bought my 450L. Retail on a 450L is what? 10.5, 10.7, something. It's over $10,000. Okay. And I got one with 300 miles. It wasn't super farkled out, but it had, you know, a rear brake reservoir guard and hand guards and a few things. But I got it for $7,700.
Yeah.
And
awesome.
Because, and I don't know, I'm making assumptions about I was a third owner and 300 miles. That tells me that somebody got on it and was like, whoa, this is more than I was expecting. Or they bought it and just never went, which happens a lot too. And you see that a lot, particularly with the higher performance, but you see 500 EXCFs like that all the time too. Not at a discount though, sadly, because that's what I was trying to buy at the time. So there is a lot of value if you're patient in buying used. There are huge advantages to that. The biggest disadvantage is you don't know what the other person has done to that thing.
That is kind of the downside to it. You don't always know what you're in for. I mean, I got really lucky when I sold my KTM. I had the 350 XCF right when I was leaving Bend. I had a guy who actually kind of knew what the bike had been through with me and that I was a beginner and whatnot. And I didn't have very much, I didn't have very many miles on it, obviously, because I had bought the bike the previous fall and was leaving. And so he actually gave it to me for price, just a little bit knocked off because one, he was a friend and desperately wanted one of those bikes, which he couldn't find anywhere nearby at the time. And two, those bikes don't lose value. But yeah, I mean, it is a huge gamble. You don't know what the bike has been through. Like I have my tractor of a Honda that's a 2004 that I bought for, you know, $3,000 last fall. And it's great. I love it. But there's definitely moments where things happen and I'm pretty sure it is a result of what was done to that bike before I owned it. And you just don't know. You never know.
Side note worth mentioning, I tried to buy that 350 from Grace, but I'm too cheap to pay what she wanted for it and what it was worth. So I ended up buying my 450L for significantly less though. So I think it worked out for everybody.
I think it did too. Yeah. My buddy that bought it will occasionally message me and be like, thank you. Like, you're welcome. I'm so happy it went to a good home. Yeah. All right. What else we got? So financing we covered. I guess one of the other things to talk about is just the general expectations and the vibe of being in, I think, a bigger dealership, because you do have people, especially the sales people, that will kind of be pushy with you. I think you and I do a decent job of holding our own grounds, but if you're kind of new to that environment, it can be super intimidating when you have a sales guy coming at you who's just kind of in your face and pushing you to buy something. And again, like you mentioned earlier, then you sit down with the financing person and they're just going to smooth over everything to make sure that you buy that bike. So I think the big thing that I would say to keep in mind when you're going into these circumstances is just know what you're willing to pay. Don't budge on it. And also don't be intimidated by these people. Half of them don't even ride motorcycles, which you kind of learn when you're there. They may have at some point in their life, but a lot of them don't ride. Some of them do. Some of them are just salesmen that got into a job working in a dealership. And a lot of times I feel like it's the same vibe you have in a tattoo shop where you have people that kind of like to be a little more intimidating and feel cool and whatever, but bottom line is you're already fucking cool buying a motorcycle. So go in there with confidence and know that like you're either going to get your bike for the price you want to pay for it, or you leave and you go somewhere else and try and find it.
So pro tip, this is something I used to do back when, one, I didn't have as much experience buying bikes, and two, before I got on anxiety meds and my social anxiety was like through the roof to like panic agreeing to things. Email. I like to work out as many details as possible ahead of time, and you got it in writing. So, and it's also a lot easier to do things like if you're trying to ask for money off, or in that
Yeah.
case, I was asking for if they threw any gear in with it if I bought it. That's harder to do in person than it is to just type into an email. And you know, and it's weird when you deal with stuff like, because you have like your fear of rejection creeps in, even though why do we care if the salesman doesn't like us? And they probably don't
Yes.
anyway. They're already like just trying to pretend to like you to get you to buy stuff. But it's a real thing that happens. And so I love to just email and be like, what is your out the door price on this bike? And then they'll send you a number and you have to actually look at it. And this is something we should talk about too, because
Yeah.
if it doesn't include DMV, tax, title, and license, that's not an out the door price, and you have to ask for that stuff. And look for things like whatever fees, whatever. If there's a delivery fee, sometimes they'll move around on that. And then
Yeah.
ask, you just offer, and they never give you your offer, but they always often will come in between your offer and what they said, and then you can negotiate in writing and worry and think about other perks and whatever. And you can also get your price nailed down because they don't usually start throwing the extended warranty stuff at you until you're in the dealership.
Yeah.
So
Exactly.
it's nice to have that number written down. You can walk in to look at the bike, and if you want to have a further conversation, you can. Then it's just a matter of resisting the push for service plans and extended warranties on Japanese bikes that don't need them.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I wouldn't be buying them. Or I love when they try to sell me a service plan at a dealership I live 2 hours away from.
Yeah.
You really think I'm going to come up here for my oil changes, bro? Like, no.
Yeah.
Anyway, the
Yeah.
tip I was trying to throw out there is if you don't want to do the negotiation thing in person, email. Email. They love answering emails.
They
It's
do.
less work for them. You walk in, especially because if you can get to the point where you get a number, you go to your bank, you give them the number, they'll send you the VIN so that you can get financing. The check, you walk in, hand them the check, sign the papers, and leave. I've done that before. Like,
Yeah.
it's super nice.
Email ahead of time is great. I mean, Ben originally had called and talked to the dealership we got the Transels from and told them that he wanted one of the two. And then I pretty much immediately then emailed them after I got off the phone with Ben and said, if the second Transel is still there, keep it for me. And then I actually called one of my gal friends who works there and said, hey, is that bike still there? Can you send somebody an email to make sure it's not at the door? So making sure you kind of do your due diligence with that ahead of time is great. And then also, again, asking the price, because that was my next question via email was, are they going to try and give me a different price than Ben? Because they didn't quite know at the time that Ben and I were coming in together. Now, they didn't try and pull a fast one on me, but that does happen sometimes. And the reason why Ben would get a different price too is because, Ben might get a discount as a reviewer or whatever else. But thankfully, Ben and I are friends, and he shared with me ahead of time that, he was basically getting this price, and I made sure I was matching that. But yeah, all the little additions get very interesting, particularly the service stuff. If you know enough about bikes, I don't think you need to be buying a service warranty for the motorcycle. I think it's just kind of silly. I have one for my Toyota truck because of the fact that I can take it to any Toyota dealership and they do everything for me, which is great. However, with motorcycles, I think it's so different because you can easily do your own oil. You can easily kind of do the maintenance on your bike, and it's going to be a lot better than trying to drive 2 hours to a dealership where you bought it originally from, right?
Yeah, and for the record, I've never gotten a Dork in the Road discount on a bike. I did kind of get a discount on that quad I bought because I knew the guy there, but
Yeah.
they didn't even know who I was. They rarely know who I am. I have gotten access to
You're
bikes.
an R-list celebrity,
That's right.
remember?
That's right. Like, I have had a dealership call me and say, "We have one of these in. Do you want it?" Because
Yeah.
they knew I would put them in a video, and
Yeah.
but I paid 1,000 over retail on that bike. Anyway, so it's important to make a distinction in what Grace is talking about here between a service plan and a maintenance plan,
Yeah.
or an extended warranty and a service plan or whatever,
Yeah.
because they'll try to sell you both. So one is well, you have a 1-year warranty, but if the bike breaks down after that, it could be expensive to fix. And here, pay us just in case your bike breaks down. And if you ever do the math about how much you're paying per month on that, versus just like putting that much in a savings account and then getting to keep it if nothing breaks down, it
Yeah.
makes a lot more sense to do the second thing. But two, there's a maintenance plan. And they'll try to tell you, some less than scrupulous salesmen will try to tell you that, well, if you want your warranty to be valid, you got to make sure that all the service is done here. That's absolute garbage.
Yeah.
You do need to be able to sort of prove that you did the oil changes, but receipts is enough for that to be able to prove that you did it. I always make videos, so no one's going to argue that I didn't do the oil change. But
Yeah.
the maintenance plan, unless you just don't want to do it, like, and maybe you don't. Like, some people don't want to do oil changes. They just want to ride, and that's fine. Like, no shame. It's just they charge you way too much. It's way more expensive than it would be to do it yourself. Now, extended warranty on a new bike, if it's a Honda, Yamaha, Kawasaki, or a Suzuki, that is a ripoff. Other bikes you can debate. I know a lot of people that have made warranty claims on other models, other brands. And it's not to say those others don't. Like, Hondas do occasionally have problems, but it's usually covered by a recall or something.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's such a good distinction to make. And yeah, I mean, what you do pay for that stuff over time is so exorbitant, because the just in case, most of the time it doesn't happen. And yeah, again, I don't love doing oil changes because I do just want to get out there and ride. But once you get the hang of it, it's a piece of cake. It doesn't take any time whatsoever. So I don't know. I think that if you can avoid that at all costs, definitely do it. If you're one of those people that likes every single safety net, yeah, I mean, do your thing. But I feel like it's very unnecessary, especially if the bike is insured, which it should be if you're out riding and doing crazy shit all the time. But just my 2 cents.
Yeah, I want to, sorry, slight tangent, but it's something you mentioned earlier and it's still been sticking in my head. And I think we'd be remiss if we didn't cover it, particularly given who we are. As a woman going into a motorcycle dealership, how would you say your experience differs than, say, me walking into a motorcycle dealership? Based on your experience, we're not assuming. We're just going to talk about what you've actually experienced.
I've had different experiences. I will say this. The best experience I've ever had at a motorcycle dealership has been at Moto Corsa in Portland. And I'm not just saying that because I know Shaheen.
Yeah.
I'm saying that because that place was great. I bought my GS from them. They were wonderful.
That place has a great vibe all around. Like, just
all around.
Go there and hang out. Like,
yes,
and Shaheen's
exactly.
a rock star. He's awesome. So
yeah, it's very, very wonderful there. If you are in Portland or around the area, go check it out. They get great bikes in all the time. But I think from my perspective as a female, it's very hit and miss because it also depends on the sales guy that's approaching me. I have gotten the calling me ma'am, which has been my favorite one so far. That was when I got the CB. I couldn't believe somebody had the audacity to call me ma'am because I don't look like a ma'am, and I get it, whatever. But the condescending mansplaining that ensues is quite hilarious because I do understand that there are a lot of women that do, again, just want to ride and they don't know a lot of the details and specs of motorcycles. They may know how to ride really well, but they don't give a shit. And you know what? There's nothing wrong with that. That's awesome. But what you deal with as a female when you walk into those places and then you're immediately condescended to, it's something we're used to, but two, it's infuriating. And I think especially for the females that ride, even if you don't give a shit about the specs, it is just the worst. And it honestly is a huge turnoff in the sense that you don't want to buy the bike then. All you want to do is get that human away from you and be around the bike. So then it consequently makes you want to rush through the process, which is never very good from a financial perspective. Thankfully, I'm confident enough, and I also just know that half these guys don't know as much as I do about the bikes when I'm in there, so I can kind of bat them aside and get around them. But it's a lot of sleaze. It's a lot of what you would imagine is kind of like trying to suck up to me, but then also trying to tell me things that I already know and that they assume I don't know. And that assumption is more infuriating than anything else. But again, that's just kind of how the culture is too. I can't tell you the number of guys that mansplain to me on my YouTube about camping, about things where if they watched any of my other videos, they would know I knew what the hell I was doing. But it's just funny to me. Like it's how the ADV world kind of still is. Now, granted, it's getting a lot better, but it still is a man's world in that realm. And the women I know, along with myself, are still kicking doors down, trying to get away from all the mansplaining that happens.
Yeah, one of the many obstacles that make it difficult for non-men to get into ADV and dual sport motorcycling that
Yeah.
some of us don't even realize we're doing.
I also, this is a great story. I was almost talked into buying a different bike at one point when I was buying my EXCF, because the guy thought he knew more about my dirt riding situation than I did. Now, granted, I was still very new to dirt bike riding, but he was then trying to talk me into buying a different bike, a completely different model than what I wanted, and more expensive and more to it and whatever else. And that kind of intimidation also is just, it's infuriating. And it is something you will run into because they try and, again, tell you that they know better than you. But at the end of the day, if you're ever a female in this situation, just stick to your guns and say no. You know, I walked out of there with my 350 and I was so happy about it, but dude was a pain in my ass. Anyway, sorry, side story.
No, that was my fault. Yeah. So sorry, I know you have some stuff planned, but we've mostly been talking about new. Should we talk about used for a little bit? Because I think it's a very different experience.
Yeah.
Private party, I mean, not from a dealership. It's the same
Yeah.
at a dealership. In fact, it's worse at a dealership because you walk in and they always, sorry, I said let's change the
No, I was
subject.
going to say also, you need to share your experience about the dealership because it's very different than mine.
Oh, like this last time? Or
no, just in general when you go in there.
Buying used bikes at a dealership is hilarious. And they won't, so motorcycle dealerships in general don't negotiate as much or sometimes not at all. I have been lucky a few times. I got, like when I bought my 250L, I got a free helmet, but I paid retail. And I always try to get as close to MSRP as I can. That's my goal. I'm not trying to get them to lose money, but I don't need them to add a bunch of fees that screw me over either.
Right.
I got my my DRZ for just over MSRP. Obviously, we paid MSRP plus fees for, although my Transel was $200 more for some reason. I still think it's the off-road tires or the better tires, but whatever. But when you go to buy a bike at a dealership, they always, doesn't matter what bike it is, doesn't matter where you are, they always paid just under what they're selling it for. We're just too into this bike to come down at all. We can't really adjust the price because, you know, we just have too much into it. You know, we still got to make some money. But when you trade in a bike, case in point, Grace, it's so weird because they'll give you thousands less than what it's worth and then turn around and try to tell you that, oh, well, you know, we've got it priced at 6,000, but we're really into it like 5,700. So we can't come down really at all. You know, we want the salesman to not get screwed over. Like, one, that's a you problem, not a me problem. But this means you don't pay your people enough. Whatever. So that's super annoying. However, buying private party is more intimidating, I think, because you have to talk to strangers and go to their house or whatever.
Yeah.
But it can be so much better because you can ask about the bike, you know, why are you selling it? What kind of stuff have you done to it? You can look at, sometimes like if you look at their profile of its marketplace, you can see the trips they've been on, or if it's someone in a group that you've been in, you know, you can really see how the bike has been, how it's been treated. You can get a sense for the person and maybe get a vibe for how they've treated the bike. For instance, when we bought Duck Fan's WR250R, we walked in and this guy had like a motorcycle mechanic shop set up in his garage. He had like 6 dirt bikes and like just like gleaming tools on the wall. And so when he said, yeah, I bought this because I wanted a dual sport, but I rode it on the road and I didn't like it and I'm going back to dirt bikes, we believed him. And, you know, so Duck bought that bike with 600 miles, well farkled, because the guy put everything he could think of on it and then just immediately sold it.
Yeah.
So there are advantages to private party. There are disadvantages to private party. You don't know what has happened to the bike, but the value is always higher.
Yeah, I agree. And I think being able to have that personal connection with the person can be huge from the buying perspective. Like even just when I sold my CB, one of the best parts about selling that bike was I FaceTimed with the guy that bought it. and was able to show him like, here's actually where this cosmetic damage happened. You know, it doesn't make any relevance to this bike's riding ability, whatever else. And then, you know, like also like, look at these, you know, pivot pegs I have on here and like all this other cool stuff that's going to help you out. You know, I think having that nice little touch of personal connection makes a huge, huge difference. But it can also backfire. Do you want to tell, this obviously isn't a motorcycle story, but I think you should share your Craigslist selling your daughter's car gone wrong story, because that is kind of something that you need to be aware of ahead of time, just in case, is that scams do happen.
Yeah, and they're out there. And side note, Fortnite is a great video on what to look at on a used motorcycle, in terms of oil leaks and fork seals and all that. But just selling, just to throw it in briefly, and there's a short on my channel if you want to see the evidence. But I was selling my daughter's Camry, and these guys came up to the house. 3 guys in a minivan. First red flag. Second red flag, I said, "Hi, Luis," because I always say the person's name, and it took him a second to realize I was talking to him. So that was weird.
Always good.
And then they start messing around with the car, and I didn't see it at the time, but one of the guys saw my ring camera, and so had the other guy pretend to like be checking the wheel alignment as he just as an excuse to pull it up out from underneath the camera. He failed, by the way, because they were just in the corner on the super wide angle lens. But then they get me, they're walking around, whatever, looking at the car, starting it, all this, and then the guy's like, "Oh, show me the trunk. Is a spare in there?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, it's all in there, everything." So I'm in the back. And when I'm in the back, the dude, so one guy's under the hood. I left the hood open. I will never do this again. I'll never leave an engine unattended. And I probably won't bring people to my house anymore unless it's somebody I know or somebody I met through the channel, but not randos. Anyway, yeah. He squirted oil out of his pocket onto the cylinder head and into the washer fluid reservoir. No, sorry, radiator reservoir. Washer fluid wouldn't have made any sense. And then they insist on going on a test drive, but I have to drive it, which I was like, that's weird. I was like, you guys can take it. Like, it's fine. Your van's here, I believe. It's like, whatever, just go for it. And he's like, no, you drive. And I was like, okay, well, do you want to come? And only the one guy came. And then I got like to the end of the road, and he's like, oh, it's fine. You can go back now. And I was like, okay, well, I got to go down here to turn around. He's like, oh, no, you can go back. This is enough. Okay, you can go. Like, and I was like, I'm just going down here to where I can turn around. Well, and I come back, and they're like, we make a deal. He's going to buy it. And then they, for some reason, pop the hood right then. And there's oil all over. And they're like, oh. And they try to convince me that had a blown head gasket, and try to offer me, no kidding, $400 for the car. And apparently, well, so I was like, the vibes were super off, obviously, at this point, a lot of red flags. So I went in the garage and I Googled oil, something, cylinder head oil, blown head gasket, something scam, found it immediately. It's one that's been existing in Europe for a while. And I just went back out and was like, you know what, guys, this bike, I just don't feel right selling you a car that's messed up like this, because there were 3 of them and we're out here in the middle of nowhere. So like when I called the cops to report it, it took them 2 hours just to get back to me. So I sure as hell wasn't going to hold them there and call the cops.
Yeah,
like a lot of people claim they would have done in the comments of that video, but whatever. So, you know, that's not something I've ever experienced before. And I tend to be a trusting person first. But there, in hindsight, there were a lot of red flags on that one.
Yeah. Well, and in that situation, you did the right thing. I think just getting them out of there, because if people are willing to do that to try and scam you, you just don't really want those type of people on your property at that point anyway. Right. Yeah. I mean, I think you can run into that shit and it can be rough. But I don't think it happens as often as it's advertised. Like, I think it happens every once in a while, but especially with motorcycles, it's not all the time.
Yeah, and I think the sweet spot when you're buying used is new or used, because if there's a big problem, you'll see it. It won't be covered up by wear and tear, and like if the side cases are all scraped up or obviously brand new, things like that, and they're not telling you why. If it's like, or if you show up and the engine's warm because it's a hard starter and they started it up ahead of time to make sure it would start when it's things like that. But that's why I say you can buy a bike that's a couple years old with all the farkles, save a few $1,000s, not have to pay for all the accessories, and not have to mount them. The disadvantage is you don't get to do your own build, but you just pull off what you don't like. Probably sell it and then replace it with what you do.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think in general, buying used is the way to go. I mean, the ADV community, for the most part, again, is pretty awesome. You know, you can find what you're looking for through all different forums and being a part of groups on Facebook and whatnot. It's super easy, and people in general, if they love motorcycles and that type of riding, tend to be pretty good people. Anybody that likes to be outside and on two wheels tends to be generally great and honest. And like you mentioned, if there is wear and tear on the bike, you can't really hide it on a motorcycle. You know, they're going to have to be honest about what that bike has been through, and when it's had issues and what it's had issues with. But yeah.
Yeah, and your point about the community is a good one, because like the only weird motorcycle sketchy experience I've ever had was buying a Grom, and the guy had put like clip-ons on it, and the title was signed by 3 owners ago, and like I was like, I'm good. So like sport bikes and I think dirt bikes, you see a lot of shenanigans, just because it's a different crowd. But like, and again, not to generalize, not all ADV riders are good, and not all dirt bike riders are bad, or whatever.
No,
there's a lot of us that do both, but you know, it's just you don't see it as much. That's all I'm saying.
You don't see it as much. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think if given the opportunity, buy used. I would always vote buy used, but I don't know. What do you think? Are you more new or more used?
Well, if you can find the bike you want in good condition with the Farkles you want used, excuse me, newer used, it's a great deal. But
yeah,
I'm also not in the never buy new school, because you can, and yes, things lose value over time, but when I've sold bikes within a year of buying them, I almost always get back what I paid.
Yeah.
I lose out on the mod money, but I know that going in. And if they do lose value over time, you got value out of it. So dual sports and adventure bikes tend to hold their value. People always say, well, I only want to buy one bike. And it's like, well, you can just sell your starter bike and buy a better one and probably not lose that much money. Now, it's seasonal. Got to remember that. So in the spring is a great time to sell the bike and a terrible time to buy one, and vice versa in the fall. Or our friend Nathan says he always likes to buy bikes in January because everyone's broke from Christmas, hasn't got their tax returns yet, so they're trying to sell their stuff, and they're willing to make a deal.
Absolutely.
Right
It's a great time to buy. Yeah, I totally agree with him on that. And it's using common sense, I think, to figure that out. But yeah, I'm definitely obviously not anti-buying new. I think it's especially if you want a bike like for a while and you know it's kind of the bike for you. I mean, that's why I bought the Transel Out, is because I knew this was the bike for me and it was going to be a long-term investment. I only had Lorraine for almost 2 years. I mean, and I put a lot of miles on that bike and I got to do so much good stuff with that bike. But you know, you move on, and you know, I got out of it a lot of what I put into it, considering the fact that that bike has been all over North America and whatnot. So
yeah, she says a lot of miles, but she means how many thousands?
How many thousands of miles?
Like 25.
Yeah,
that's a lot. All the bikes in my garage combined don't have 25,000 miles.
Yeah, but that's, I mean, and that's from, oh man, I mean, Lorraine's been through Canada. She's been all over Western North America, down to Mexico, down through Baja, down and up. Like she's seen some shit. Yeah.
Well, this has been interesting and enlightening. I kind of thought we would get to selling bikes, but clearly there's a lot to talk about here. And so let us know, I guess, in the comments or whatever, if you want to hear us talk about selling bikes and what that looks like and the things we've learned over the years.
Yeah, I think selling bikes should be its own topic because it's about as convoluted as buying, and there's a lot of tricks of the trade for a lot of different reasons. So yeah, if anybody's interested in hearing about selling bikes, Ben and I will take note and have that be a separate episode. I think that'll be especially important come spring, because that is when a lot of people are looking to buy. And also to sell, because the season is coming.
Yeah, February, March is when my channel wakes back up from the winter and everybody gets super stoked to read and see about bikes and camping gear.
Yeah, all the camping gear and the bikes. Man, I'm so bummed it's winter right now. I just want to get out on my motorcycle and it's 30 degrees and it's too cold. It's too cold.
Yeah, I've got a press bike in the garage. I haven't gotten to ride yet because it's been raining every day. and I want to get at least one video of it clean before I start getting it all muddy.
Yeah, I feel you, man. Well, I need to get over there and ride at some point soon too. I know you have rain and mud, but it's at least a little bit milder than it is here.
Yeah, it's tolerable.
Yeah. Yeah, it gets a little chilly in the desert, but yeah. All right. Well, thank you everybody for hanging out with us while we discuss buying bikes, new, used, what have you. You can find me. I am the Graceful Renegade on YouTube and on Instagram. Ben?
I am Dork in the Road on YouTube, and a Dork in the Road on Instagram, and Dork in the Road on TikTok, and Dork in the Road on Facebook, and yada yada yada.
And yada yada yada. All right, everybody. Thanks for being here. As always, live wild, ride free.
And please do not forget to be excellent to each other.
Bye.
Thank you.